Hello and welcome to Season 4 of the Sunday Podcast, presented by sportsshoes.com. I'm Ollie Lum.
And I'm Matt Seddon.
This podcast is all about elite distance running in the UK.
We're here to give you all the latest news updates around the sport,
as well as weekly interviews with athletes and coaches.
Stay up to date by following us on Instagram and X at Sunday Podcast.
And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel too, where we post athlete workout videos, shoe reviews and more.
Thanks for listening, and as always, we hope you enjoy the episode.
Okay, hello, welcome back to another episode. As always, you can see from the title, Brendan Hackett on this week. Kind of former CEO of Irish Athletics, one of the co-founders of the Irish BMC, the Irish Miners Club, so the IMC, and also a sports psychologist who worked with Athletics Ireland for a number of years, been to a few Olympic Games as a psychologist for them. So we'll get into that later on. Hopefully that's like another nice informative one for you, kind of linking in with some previous ones we've had with S&C coaches, physiologists, and then obviously Josh Rowe from Morton last week as well. But Matt, it's quite a lot we need to get into, isn't there? There's a few races, obviously Highgate, but we thought we'd start with Mr. Jakob Ingebrigtsen has decided that he is no longer above participating in workout videos. He is no longer the king of secrecy. He's trying to keep himself relevant. He's let FlowTrack in. He wants to be Josh Kerr. He's still not quite, but let's chat about his workout, Matt.
Oh, mate. Yeah, I'm absolutely buzzing. I've just watched it a couple times now. And you're right. I think a guy who just had that air of exclusivity, like we knew he does the double threshold. He kind of let on some stuff, but then we never actually, I feel like we don't completely understand kind of who he is and what he does still. And this workout gives us a little bit, he shows us the inside a little bit more. And I don't know if that's a backward step for him, or like, I think a bit of a surprise that not that he's dropped to that level. I guess it's very good for the sport. I'm sure it will get a lot of interest. But yeah, I mean, would champions of the past let in their absolute prime? So yeah, I was surprised, to be honest with you. However, I've got a newfound respect for him because I just thought there was absolutely no bullshit in the workout. Like, he just spoke the truth. He ripped some fast 200 at the end in sort of 26, 27, and when he's been questioned about them, he said, look, the paces are relevant. I've got a massive tail. He's admitting that. He's admitting that it was hard work as well. Like, he found it hard. I think he struggled. But what's quite scary is, like, he was running 62, 61s at 7,000 feet altitude, and his heart rate was under 160. Those of you who, I guess, wear a heart rate monitor or just keep an eye on that, like, Jesus, that is virtually steady running, maybe tempo running for some people. Like, it's quite scary that his heart rate was so low. And, he gives more insight on the training day. I mean, that was a 30.3 kilometer day. His main session was 12 fours and 10 twos. And in that total day, he ran 30K, which is just, again, is like, wow. But yeah, I think I was just most impressed with his attitude and the way he was discussing a few things. He mentioned about how a few people have been taking lactate wrong. We see a lower lactate reading as better, but he actually alluded that sometimes if you're really fatigued, you just can't get it up. And excuse the pun.
This is going to be a PG podcast, mate. What are you playing?
And sometimes if your lactate is low, it means chances are you might be fatigued as well. So there was just a lot of like snippets of gold to take away from it. But yeah, I guess actually we have seen the documentaries that he did, pre winning that Olympic gold, him and his family. But I feel like I don't know, yeah, this was kind of Jakob in a new light, in a bit of a new era as well. So surprised, to say the least. Fair play to FlowTrack coming back from the depths of, I don't know where, like, they were the heroes back in, when we were at uni, weren't they? 2012, 2013. And yeah, they seem to have dropped off the radar a bit, but this was epic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see FlowTrack back. It's interesting, isn't it? You makes me think, like, would Gert have allowed this back in the day? I don't think so.
Well, this is what I mean. Gert definitely wouldn't have allowed that. And what's more as well, and I think people don't quite realize it, Jakob was at this track. Like, yes, he had the film crew there. There was no coach. There was no entourage. This was like an Olympic champion, arguably one of the best 1,500 meter runners ever, just goes down to some local track and flag stuff completely solo. I just thought, wow, like I don't know many athletes who I know they do occasionally, but I just thought, fair play, man. The guy just grinds.
Yeah, he is wired that way though, isn't he? He is very, very focused. Like that's always come across. But I just think, yeah, it's interesting because the kind of Ingebrigtsen documentaries we've seen, I think I always got the sense they were very controlled. It was almost like what they wanted to show. Whereas
Mm,
you go
mm.
film a full workout, there's no hiding, that's just that is what it is. And like you said, he's kind of open and honest throughout. Look, what's Josh Kerr thinking? Watching that. Well, I want to know.
Well, I think the workout itself, to be fair, if you're a world-class 1500 runner, like it's not that flashy.
So Christian
Josh Kerr
Serrano,
probably
is
looks
it?
at that and think, like, come on, Josh Kerr, 2 mile world record holder. Like, yeah, Christian Serrato's workout back in the day. God, that's filthy. But, so I think someone like Kerr is like, he's not phased by Jakob running some 61, 62s. Like, must be, chilling for Kerr just as much it is for him. And but I guess it's just interesting. And I think Kerr will make of it. Like, I think the thing is, with elites, they know what they're doing and they know what they've done and what they're capable of. And we don't really know that. So I guess we don't really know how Kerr would react to that. But I think the fact that he is publishing workout videos, I think that will quite excite Kerr. And again, it's just building to this hype. And we think it might be out by the time you guys are listening. There might be a workout out with Kerr already. We've seen teasers of Track All Access filming a workout with him and some great interactions with Danny Mackey and Kerr talking about that British mile record of 3:46 going into pre. So and even the 1500 world record as well. So just the pair of them, just giving the fans what they want. To be honest with you, we could see some more of this sort of stuff going into Paris. Will just be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It seems like some people are really kind of paying attention, listening to what the fans want, and starting to create this rivalry. And I think Josh Kerr's been at the forefront of creating that, hasn't he? So obviously, look, by the time this comes out, people would have seen the race. So maybe our discussion on it will be kind of looked on a bit differently, but be interesting to see, won't it? But yeah, that's pretty much that. Obviously, some other races have been going down. Let's get into Highgate, mate, because
Yeah.
that was one we build with kind of a big preview episode before. Megan Keith again, phenomenal, got to win. That for me has got to be the run of the event. Especially just like we didn't actually see that many Brits taking the win overall in the race.
Look, don't quote me on this, but I want to say I think she was the only British person to win in Highgate. I think all the other races, even the slower sections, were won by internationals. So that was, I guess, a little bit of a change in the guard at the night of 10K PBs. So that was interesting. But yeah, so I think she was the only one or one of two maybe. But yeah, fantastic race. I just think again, we talk about Kerr and Jakob giving us what we want. I think Keith just gave us what we wanted, given home crowd. Yeah, she mentioned family had flown over from New Zealand and everyone was in town to watch it and everyone was trackside. And for her to like come away with that kick as well. And you've got to be edging your bets, given how she's been performing over 5K and 10K. And look, Fiona O'Keefe, obviously, clearly a very good athlete going to the Olympics in the marathon. But yeah, when you've got Megan who's been running 5Ks on the track, for O'Keefe who's been doing marathons, you're like, surely she's gonna win in a kick finish. But it was looking doubtful with even as late as sort of 250 to go, 200 to go, a little gap opening up. But then Keith just found something from somewhere. But I think it was a nice kind of it almost turned to a little bit of a championship race towards the end as well. And I think that for her, that's really, really good practice going into Paris.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a classy run, wasn't it? Because I think, yeah, like you say, everyone before the race was like, "Oh yeah, you're back, Keith." But actually, when it got to it, it looked at one point like she wasn't going to make it. Like the gap opened up, but yeah, she came back. from the depths, and got herself over the line, top spot. Obviously, in the men's race, Paddy Diva, who nearly saw kind of a mirroring of that, but just couldn't quite get along across the line first. But obviously, British champ, and some good points for him there still.
Yeah, deep. Look, this is me and you had this discussion as well, didn't we? After when we were breaking it down, and it's almost like I think Charles Hicks mentioned this in an interview. Like, is the atmosphere too good at Highgate? Because you know, people listening will be like, "Don't be daft." Like, that's exactly what anyone's ever wanted. It's what the fans want, and I totally agree. But I mean, Hicks alluded to it, didn't he? He said, you know, it just gets you so amped up, and I just think, you know, you just even when you think you're holding back, I think you're still aggressive through that first half. And again, for me, I think with the wave lights being, I think they needed to be smart with the wave lights and you know try and negative split the races
Mm,
because the problem is when you've got those wave lights at 27 flat speed, and it was the same in kind of the women's race and other races throughout the day, is you automatically limit how many people can actually even get on that light without completely blowing up. And you know, we saw in some of the early races like at 4K, it was a massacre out there. And I think had they set the wave lights for maybe 27:15 pace, you know, so sort of 13, just inside 13:40 at halfway, I think it allows a few more people to be in that front grab pack at 5K, and then someone like Paddy and that Ismail guy can kind of push on in the latter stages. Whereas, you know, got to 5K, Paddy's on his own, takes the lead and throws down some big laps to try and keep it rolling. But then by 6K, you know, we start to see how the race is going to pan out. So I think could have been potentially a little bit smart with the wave lights, and this is what they do at the 10 in California that is so successful. They set them slower on purpose, and they know they're going to close. Whereas we didn't really see that, and we saw a slight lift in tempo in the two elite races, but we didn't see like a big last K. And I think when you are going to run your best 10,000 meter race, I think that's what you need to do.
yeah, I'd agree with that, mate. And I think that's where we're going back to the crowd. I think it makes that key difference with the K to go. But it's just when people, like you say, Charles Hicks mentioned it, you got to be relaxed for 5K, at least
Yeah.
3K. You can't be going into a 10K. Like, it's when you see people like absolutely linging their strides, like just before the 10K as well. I'm like, okay, like maybe a bit of time before, but yeah, there's you don't need to be on it from the
Mm,
gun. I don't know.
mm.
People might say differently. I remember watching interviews of Farah. He used to say himself, you need to be chilling first few laps, and he was the best at it, wasn't he? So yeah,
I think, yeah.
very interesting
Yeah.
debate there. In terms of like spectator experience, though, fan experience, the actual hype of the event is fabulous. Like you can't beat it. So we're not complaining. We're just maybe it's just the athletes need to actually adjust and be like, well, okay, I know it's going to be like that. I need to. Obviously, we got Brendan Hackett on today. He talks a bit about kind of prepping yourself psychologically
Mm,
for races. And I think athletes need to take that into account a bit more. Like if you're someone who's used to just going to these high caliber meets where you're just rolling around on good tracks, but the atmosphere is pretty low key, you need to be able to adjust
mm.
if you want to perform at Highgate. And you need to tap into it when it matters in the last K, but early on you need to ignore that crowd.
Yeah, it's that's a great point because Hackett mentioned sound, doesn't he, when he was preparing like I don't know, I can't remember what he mentioned. He was preparing one of the teams and for the Olympic Games or the boxer for the Olympic Games, and how the noise is so much louder. And like, yeah, even then, you know, when you can't hear yourself think, you can't hear yourself breathe, like because it's so loud at Highgate. That's something which, you know, they might need to somehow try and replicate in training, whether just through kind of like, you know, music, loud music in their ears and stuff to try and stay composed. That's an interesting point you touch on, but you are right. It's an atmosphere that even you know, unless you go to Olympic Games, you're in that Olympic final. You might get an atmosphere similar, but then again, the crowd aren't on top of you, so it's not
Mm.
as like personal. Whereas in Highgate, They're literally on top of you. And I think you can actually hear exactly what's being said instead of this like constant buzz and hum. Like I remember when I've been at Worlds, when Farah won in 2017, it was like just a constant noise. And I think that's very different to at Highgate, just people shouting in your face. And so I think, yeah, athletes potentially do need to get used to that. It's a great problem to have. And yeah, talking about the event that you mentioned there, mate, I think once again, I don't know how Ben and the team do it. It was better than last year, and it was bigger than last year. And the depth. Okay, we didn't get those championship records, but meet records, but the depth was way deeper. I mean, talk about Rory Leonard getting that Euro standard in 8th, 28, 27:38 for 8th place. And you've got obviously Deverin behind him. You've got a Frenchman, Bohr, Chelimo, Kesai, Getahan, like just super, super depth. I mean, the amount of men, there was 20 men inside 28 minutes in that A race.
And you've got guys in a B race running 28 minutes.
19 men inside the European standard, by the way. Obviously, some aren't European, but yeah. And then you've got the B race as well. So, one of the best ever,
Brilliant
man.
stuff going forward, isn't it? So
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Good
It
for
really
British distance running as a whole, particularly obviously 10,000 meter track running. A few other races went down as well. We did post, I should say our new social media intern posted some results on Monday. Apologies to anyone who wasn't included on those. Nothing personal. We're just trying to do the best we can. But
look, mate, we like. I think the only person we didn't include, by the way, is George Bell broke 2 minutes. First time 1:59. But that was on a Wednesday night, so that was a little after. So I didn't really include that in the weekend roundup. And then Rishal Manur, I know he'll be listening, but 1:45, 800 as well. So he's steadily working his way up those 800 ranks. But then again, when the men's 800 is so deep right now, and Giles has just won in Marseille last night in 1:40, 1:44 mid. He's chopped a second off his season's best. Like Rowden and him are going to go in. They're going to race in France again on Saturday. Like I just feel this weekend is going to be absolutely mega. And if you are if you're an athlete who's trying to peak at trials, you're looking at this weekend, and look, all our top athletes are at pre-classic, but then all those ones just below, they're all over Europe. They're scattered around Europe this weekend. They're at the BMC in Sports City, Phoebe Gill, people like that. And this is where they're all going for their big time, and then they'll get stuck back into a training block ahead of 4 weeks ahead of champs. So yeah, that results roundup's going to be mega this weekend as well.
yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing who makes it. Looking forward to getting some messages as well and comments from people who don't. So that's always fun and games, isn't it? But Matt, should we get into this week's episodes with Brendan, and then obviously we'll preview some upcoming races. Sorry, afterwards. Okay, firstly, Brendan, just welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. We've actually been after a psychologist for a while, and so it was quite nice that Matt bumped into you the other day. But how are you, first of all?
Yeah, great. Looking out on a day that's trying to be sunny over here.
Yeah. So you've just got back to Ireland after being down at the Bannister Miles. But do you mind just kicking off the podcast by giving us a brief background to yourself and kind of your roles you've had in the sport?
Yeah, I've been coaching for about 40 years. I started, I was a physical education student and got into coaching very early. Loved it. I coached Gaelic football, which is Irish football that's what I grew up playing. That was my number one sport. Athletics was number two. When I went to college, I got involved in football first and as I said, began coaching. Then when I left college, I got sucked into coaching teams. And that's really how I got interested in psychology. I got to a point where I had a background, obviously, in physical fitness and skill development. And then when you coach teams, you get into strategy and tactics. So they were the pillars on which I coached teams, and it brought a good bit of success in the early years. And then at a very high level over here, got a team to a semi-final that were going really well at half time and then completely collapsed in the second half. And at the time, I had no answer. This is the mid 80s, late 80s. And I was going over to the English Football Association doing coaching courses. And these two psychologists came in, John Sayer and Chris Conley. They were working with Spurs at the time. And I just remember being intrigued by their work. And I bought their book and took it back with me. And I suppose that was the introduction to sports psychology. And then I started to bring it into my coaching to pretty good effect. And then I got a chance to go back to college. So I was out 10 years at this stage, and I went back and did a master's in sports psychology in the early 90s. And it was a relatively new subject here. There were no courses in it, so I had to do a lot of research. And I was fortunate to go to Australia with an Irish football team and went literally to the Institute of Sport over there and to several teams. And yeah, that I saw the value of having a sports psych or a performance coach working with teams and individuals. So that was the basis of my master's. And when I came out, I just wanted to spread the word to everybody else. And one of the early things I did was write an article in what was the Irish Runner magazine, which was the principal magazine over here for athletics. And athletes started to come and see me on foot of the articles. And I remember two things distinctly, and this is how I got into coaching athletics. I remember a young athlete coming who was having problems with a coach. I came from a football background, so coaches changed every year or every 2 years, and this particular, they wanted to change coach. And I went, what's the big deal? Just change. And they came back a few weeks later and said, we've changed, but we can't get anybody. And I said, okay, well, I'll help you for the time being. And then I remember another guy coming to see me, and I was asking him, his coach wouldn't come. And I kind of picked up a bit of resistance. Maybe the coach was an old timer. And I said, right, so tell me about your training. Well, we do 16/400s as the main session. And I went, yeah. And in the spring then, how does that progress? Well, we still do 16/400s. And in the summer, 16/400s. And probably my face portrayed kind of, little bit of disquiet. And as a result, then he started to come more, and we got talking a bit more about coaching and his planning and or lack of planning. And he was a very good athlete. So that's how I started coaching athletes, as a result of them coming to see me from the psychology side. And then there was a University College Dublin had a scholarship program over here, and it was a good middle distance program. James Nolan, David Matthews were there, and their coach passed away very suddenly. And I had been working with those guys on the psychological side, mental training, and they were without a coach. So that literally became the basis of a group that were highly successful. So I got into coaching then athletics at a high level for probably 10, 12 years, going right up to Olympic level and world championships with them. Some obviously they won national medals. James Nolan got to an Olympic semi-final, won a couple of European medals. David Matthews was the Irish record holder for 800 for about 15 or 16 years. And started to go over to the lack of racing here meant that we started to go over to the British Milers Club. I think I was probably one of the first coaches to go over. And a lot of the athletes obviously started to run PBs because of the way the races were set up. And then other Irish athletes just started to follow and started to copy what we were doing. And I remember, I got quite close to Frank Horwell, the founder of the British Milers Club, who was a great character. Mm. And one night at Watford, I counted, and there were 50 Irish athletes running at the meet in Watford. And I, and talking to Frank, said, you should set up an Irish Milers Club. And so that's about 20 years ago, we set up the Irish Milers Club then. So that's a very quick outline of how I've been involved in athletics.
Mm. That's very useful, mate. I mean, there's a few things I want to pick up on. You mentioned early about, bringing psychology to a team sport. But I wanted to ask you, you've worked in both team setting and individual sport like distance running. Is there a different psychology? Like, do your methods change as well? Does your practice change? Are athletes wired differently?
Well, let me answer that in a broader way. So for me, I like the term mental fitness, because most people are familiar with the term physical fitness and they have an understanding, so when you talk about somebody being physically fit, you talk about them being able to, deal with the demands of their sport. So if it's a marathon runner, it's 2 to 3 hours. If it's a sprinter, it's 10 seconds. So the demands are different. And so mentally the same. I call mental fitness having the ability to deal with the mental demands of your discipline or your sport. And you can train and build that fitness the same way as you can build physical fitness. So people understand that if I want to get faster, I have to run faster. If I want to get stronger, I have to go into the gym. If I want to get supple, I've got to do stretching exercises. Well, mental fitness to me then has different components as well. So to make it very easy, I say, 4 C's: commitment, confidence, control, and concentration. And if you develop each of those 4 areas, you're going to meet the mental demands of your sport. Now, the mental demands of an individual athlete are slightly different than the demands of a footballer or a football team. So yes, you have to deal with them differently. The biggest challenge to me with a team is you have anything up to 20 guys in a squad. So obviously you're giving them information and you're not sure what lands, because different people in a group will learn differently. Some will be visual, some will be auditory. Whereas with an individual, when you're working with an individual athlete, you're face to face. You can see them, you can see the reaction, you can question them, you can spend time with them, and you just know what makes them tick and what's working for them. So that's the biggest difference. And then obviously, the demands of a football game, it lasts 90 minutes. There are opponents, there are distractions, there are different demands going on. Whereas an individual athlete, depending on the event, you have to work and deal with the demands slightly differently. So for me,
go on.
I was just going to say, one of the biggest ones to start with, a football team generally, their training ratio is maybe, they've a game for every 2 or 3 training sessions. So that's very different to an athlete who probably trains 90% of the time for 10 races in a season, or 12 races. So commitment is a huge area that I would start with an athlete, because really commitment is about the energy and the effort that you're putting into a goal. So an athlete puts in huge effort and energy, and sometimes to try and focus that in the right way is a challenge, because they athletes rarely lack commitment. It's just how to harness it properly and how to guide them. And that's usually where they need external help. Their coach may be well able to do it, and then sometimes they might need a little bit of external help. But to me, a lot of mental fitness can be developed with their coach.
I was going to say, you talk about the 4 C's: commitment, obviously, control, confidence, and concentration. How do you go about developing that then? You said maybe commitment's easy because athletes are very committed people, but kind of confidence and concentration, how would you develop that?
Yeah, so like I said to you, if you want to develop a physical component, you'll train regularly. You'll do circuit training or stretching or sprint work or intervals or whatever. So you've got to think of mental training as similar. It's a process of using different strategies to help build your confidence. So let's take confidence, for example. One of the things so confidence is your belief in your ability, or your belief that you can attain your goal. So how do you work on somebody's belief? Sometimes you have to examine their beliefs. Some people have limiting beliefs that they have without, they don't realize they've picked them up. Somebody has said something to them over the years, or it's a general thinking. Let's take an example that we know about recently. I found the Bannister sub 4-minute mile really interesting, because at the time the belief was 4 minutes, breaking 4 minutes for the mile was impossible. And every runner believed that. And so therefore they were held back by that belief. Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, and then every major miler over the next couple of years breaks 4 minutes. The belief, the limiting belief was shattered. So sometimes sitting down with an athlete, and they may have limiting beliefs about certain opponents. A great example are the two British guys that have beaten Jakob Ingebrigtsen. The belief was he's untouchable, he's unbeatable. Suddenly one Jake Whiteman comes out and beats him, and then the following World Championship Kerr beats him because the belief has been challenged. Other things that help with building confidence would be just, I call it getting images. Having images around your house or around your training area that just typify success. It may have been your own success in the past. It just gives you a little reminder. I have a photograph on my desk of certain successes of athletes that I've coached. And it's just there. You just glance at it every now and again, because as a coach, I will go through periods where you doubt what you're doing is the right thing. But I have these images around of it might be a medal, it might be a photograph. So they help. And the other key one for me is, I call it, the technical term, if you like, are affirmations. And it just means having a sentence or two about yourself. I am strong, I am committed, I am a hard worker. And they're like press-ups. If you're going to do your press-ups every day over a period of time, you're going to get some benefit from that. If you're saying your little affirmations to yourself, and I don't mean the American, stand in front of the mirror, I am beautiful, I am the world's greatest. They just need to be realistic, and you just say those to yourself, because our system, Ireland, England are pretty much the same. Our system of education is always highlighting what you're doing wrong, and we're trying to fix it. Whereas there's very few people going around saying what you're doing well and what you're doing right. So sometimes you have to remind yourself and build a little bit of confidence. And the other one for me then is monitoring the voice in your head. You wouldn't let somebody follow you around the track telling you that you're tired, this is your wrong event, you shouldn't be competing at this level. Like, you just tell somebody like that to get away. But we do that in our own heads. Sometimes we're our biggest critic. And that dents your confidence. That's draining at your confidence. So being somebody who monitors the voice in your head. There's a great example. Before the Sydney Olympics, the Australians got all their legends together, their gold medalists from the past, and they recorded a series of interviews with them, and they wrote it up in a book, and they gave it to all their contestants. But the one that intrigued me was Herb Elliott. Herb Elliott had never been beaten over 1500 or the mile, and he was the raging hot favourite for the 1500 in Rome back in 1960. And he wrote the piece about the voice in your head. That was the heading of his piece. And he spoke about, he usually went from 800 meters out and he just blew the opposition away. And he's coming down to the 800 meters to go in the Olympic final. And this doubt comes into his head. Herb, you're not feeling great today. If you go now, they're just going to sit on you and blow you away at the finish. And he said the difference between being a legend and just another runner was the next 1 second. And what he did was stop the negative immediately and just thrust forward. And he said, not alone did he win it, but he broke the Olympic record. So this was somebody who a doubt came in for a split second. And for me, successful people have learned to just deal with that doubt immediately and, push the positive voice. Go, Herb, go now, go for it. And that sounds easy and it sounds common sense, but it's not common practice. So if I'm coaching a group of athletes or a group of football players, you can see the body language sometimes where the confidence, or they're going through a period of doubt, and you're trying to encourage them. Come on, change the voice in your head. During the track interval, I remember several times on the track, the guys who come through, you might say, right, listen, I want you to do 400. We're going to do them in 58s, 59s today. And they'd come through and the first one would be 61. And you'd see the heads drops. And I just go, no, you have 30 seconds, 40 seconds, have a chat with yourself. And you'd see them visibly coming back. That's incorporating mental training into an interval session so that when the doubt comes in a race, remember, the opposite to confidence is doubt. So when the doubt comes, you have to be able to quickly deal with it and immediately put the positive thought. But if you haven't been practicing that in your interval sessions or in your long runs or whatever, it's not going to happen for you on the day. And that was the point that Elliot was making in that. He learned to control the voice in his head. So when he would go to the track on a windy day and everybody would be doing their 200s with the wind, he would do his 200s against the wind, to build that mental, and he'd say, I'm tougher than them. I'm tougher than everybody else. And so that's how you build confidence. You build it. The other way of building confidence for me is keeping a diary and putting that diary on a big spreadsheet, because athletes are great at keeping diaries, but they don't look sometimes at it over, 8 or 10 weeks to actually see, look at the body of work I've done. Where else do athletes get doubts? When they miss 2 days or they miss a session. They think catastrophe, I've missed a week, I've missed, and there's so many examples of Olympic and world champions who get slightly ill or injured in the run up to a major games and have to take a week or two off, and it freshens them up. But a lot of people don't see it that way. They begin to doubt their training and doubt their fitness. And so it's a constant. So for me, physical fitness is very stable. If you spend months and months building up your physical fitness, it's at a level, you don't lose it very quickly. But your mental fitness can change within seconds. One bad move in a race, one bad training session, suddenly your mental fitness can change. Your confidence can just erode from maybe a 9 out of 10 back down to a 6 out of 10. That's how quickly and how volatile mental fitness is.
Yeah, some really interesting points for people to kind of take away there. Speaking about that kind of volatility, I also wanted to ask you about maybe how long it takes to build some of this up as well. So you were a psychologist for Team Ireland in 04, is that right?
Yeah, 04, 08, 12, I would have been at those 3 games, and the 2 previous to that I wouldn't have been there, but I would have worked with athletes who went to Atlanta and Sydney.
Yeah. So say going into a games, for example, for how long would you work with maybe a certain group of athletes who were kind of looking to go or potentially going?
It went from everything from literally 1 or 2 sessions to years. It just varies with the people. The ideal is at the top level, most of the athletes at the top level would have a support system now. They wouldn't have had that back in Sydney. It was just individuals got hold of their and made up their own support system. The governing bodies have support systems in place now. So there's physiologists, nutritionists, psychologists, biomechanists, and they have access to those right for the period all the way up to the games. If you build a relationship with somebody, and that's really what, working on mental fitness, it's very hard to do it in a one-off. You really need to build a relationship. So there was one particular athlete I would have worked with over 3 Olympic cycles. So 12 years would have been the longest I worked with somebody. And that could have gone right down to just a short period. But the interesting thing about a games, particularly in Olympic games, the vast majority of people underperform at an Olympics. And the reasons for that were well documented documented in a study done years ago. And the three main reasons were overtraining in Olympic year, thinking because it's an Olympic year or I'm training for a world championship, I have to do more, and they end up overdoing it. Late qualification, and I would have experienced that with athletes. Your really top class athletes will get the qualification in their first race. Your person who's going there just as a contender, as opposed to a medalist, will spend so much energy trying to qualify that when they get there, they're shattered. And then the biggest reason is just blown away by the whole occasion. And so, particularly the third one, you've got to try and prepare people for the occasion, especially if it's their first games. So if they can visit some of the sites beforehand. So, for example, the guy that I worked with over 3 cycles was a slalom canoeist, and his best chance was Beijing. So we would have been to Beijing beforehand. He would have practiced on the course. We knew everything about the area. Would have done video recordings of the course. Then for the day, which was an interesting one, we took recordings from the previous World Championship. The PA, the loud noises, the PA, and then when he was on the water, he would have put in headphones with all this noise in his head, because he spoke about Athens, his first games, where he just got blown away by the noise, the occasion, and he completely underperformed. In Beijing, he was 4th. Just narrowly missed a medal, but for him, he did his absolute best on the day. But he had prepared for everything. He had been to the course, he had visualized it, he had done runs on the course, he knew what his accommodation was going to be, he knew the routes to and from. So that lessens the awe, if you like, of the occasion. I remember another one, just to give you an example. I worked with the Irish equestrian team, the eventing team, and they told me in Sydney that the occasion spooked the horses. So in the lead up to Athens, we'd done a lot of work in arenas where we had noise coming over the PA system, and the horses got used to the noise. And when we got to Athens, we went down to the arena beforehand. We did the walkthrough. We got everything sorted, and then on the day, one of the things we did, this is just experience, on the day, the flags all went up for all the competing countries, and it was windy. And the way the ropes, the wind was banging the ropes off the hollow poles, and it was a huge racket, and everybody got spooked by that. And so that's what I mean about Olympic Games. There's just things thrown into games that you don't think about. I remember working with one of the boxers it was Athens, and his first bout was in a near empty hall. He got through flying colours, and then I tried to talk to him about his next bout, which was on a Saturday evening, and there was no other event on. And I knew what was going to happen. All the Irish fans turned up, and they were there about 2 hours beforehand. They were dressed in leprechaun suits, and there was beer at the venue, and it was a completely and utterly different atmosphere. And he came running out, and he just ran straight past his coach, nearly jumped the 4 ropes and into the ring, and he was gone. The adrenaline, he was so pumped up with the atmosphere, that to try and get him back into the zone before the fight started. So those are the kind of things that you're trying to help athletes with who are going to major games. Now you can take that down to a national championship. You can have a regional athlete who's competing at small events, and suddenly they qualify for a big event like the 3As. And, they start seeing opponents, people that look bigger than them. They've got flashier spikes than them. Their club has got a marquee there, and you're there on your own, and you've got to prepare athletes for, and that's mental. That's the mental demands of an occasion that you're trying to help athletes to cope with.
It's interesting because sports psychology is often considered for people who have, I guess, had the setbacks or choked, like you said. Those people have been to Olympic Games and it be a bit of a disaster, and then they want to correct that. But can even the best in the game, can they improve their mindset?
Yeah, it's interesting what you say. I mean, for a long time, 80% of the people who would come to see me had a problem.
Yeah.
And that's why they were coming, just the same as they go to a physio when they're injured. Now people are beginning to go to physiotherapists for prehab in advance to make sure they don't get injured. And a lot of people are beginning to use sports psychology in advance to steel themselves or build themselves instead of waiting for the problem to happen. They're seeing it as an enhancement now rather than sorting a problem. And I prefer the term mental fitness, or I sometimes use the term performance coach, because psychology has that connotation of you've a problem or you've a weakness and you need sorting out. That's changed a lot in the last number of years. But yeah, to view it more as a positive, the same way as you develop your physical fitness, or you're developing your nutritional plan to help you. You should see developing mental fitness as an asset. I have a great example to explain to athletes a lot of times. It's like if you call the four pillars of performance: physical fitness, technical ability, tactical, and mental fitness. And imagine they're the four legs of a chair. And sometimes, to illustrate it, I will get up on the chair and I'll start standing on it, and then I'll start jumping on it. And I go, if one of the legs in this chair is weak, it's going to collapse. And the pressure becomes greater at a bigger event. It's okay in a small event. Now you go to a bigger event, more pressure on the four legs, bigger event again, more pressure. And that's why each of the areas need to be strong to meet the demands of the situation. And so coaches can play a huge part in helping their athletes, the language that they use, the way they help athletes refocus. They're all skills that the coach should be employing with their athletes on a regular basis. And the athletes themselves should be trying to work on every time they go to a session. They should be working on their mental as well as their physical.
It's very difficult because that's probably one part of the sport which isn't really coached. Is it? Coaches, they understand a lot about the physiology of the sport and the physical demands, but those relationships, would you say they just develop over that ability to communicate with an athlete develops over experience?
Yeah, a lot of time it's left to trial and error. So you'd meet athletes who've learned through all of their mistakes. But imagine a coach had the same awareness about mental fitness and how to develop it as they had about physical fitness. Just think the benefit they would bring to their athletes. And I think coaching courses are beginning to include a lot more information now about mental fitness. It's easy to do. So sitting down and planning and helping engaging the athlete in the planning process is helping their commitment. Having a goal at every session, no matter what the session is, but having a goal is directing their energy. Teaching them how to monitor the voice in their head and change the voice in their head. And there's a great saying, criticism stings more than praise pleases. So some coaches can tend to be very critical of athletes, picking out what they're doing wrong all the time. Catch them doing things right. Highlight what they're doing right. Build their confidence. Show them how the plan is going well. Show them how the times are really improving. Anything that you can do to build an athlete's confidence. Control, teaching an athlete how to control their anxiety, particularly at events, is something a coach can do. So what can the coach do? Having a pre-race routine, teaching the athlete how to plan before an event, so practice the routine at home on your own track. When you get to the bigger events, you know what you're going to do. Ignore others, practice your own routine. When you get closer to the event, if the anxiety levels are high, breathing is one of the few things that can take your anxiety levels down. Teaching an athlete how to use their breath to take their anxiety levels just down. I used to love watching the Africans, the Kenyans and the Ethiopians at major events. And the thing that struck me was they were so relaxed. The European athletes, you know, particularly the UK and the Irish athletes, were doing extra bounds and extra strides, and the Africans were so loose and breathing and smiling. And I learned a lot from that. And you're trying to teach athletes, look, you're going to perform well when you're reasonably happy, when you're in a positive mood, when you're a little bit nervous, obviously, but at the same time in control of it, and you're focused. So you have to teach athletes how to get into that mindset. And you teach them at training, and you teach them and you talk to them in advance of an event. You talk to them after an event. What went well with your pre-race routine? You know, how were you at the start of the race? How were you within the race? Was there any negative thoughts? Was there any anxiety? Did you feel, you know, if you had to run the race again, what would you do differently? What have you learned from the experience? That's all developing mental strength and mental fitness.
Yeah, that's some great examples for people. Again, looking at kind of, we've mentioned before, this is normally something like psychology or psychological training is normally something that's reserved for elites. But at what age can athletes start kind of implementing these ideas into their kind of training processes? And maybe what's the youngest athlete you work with as well?
6-year-olds. You know, that's when you start. Why wait until somebody's, you know, you're building somebody's, what do you do with 6-year-olds? So if you're a club coach and you've got a nursery down there and the kids come along, what's the first thing you want them to do is have fun and enjoy coming down to the athletics track. So you're ensuring that everything is fun, and you're asking the kids, are they having fun? And you're building a kind of an enjoyment about the sport in. So that's, you're deliberately doing that. That shouldn't be by accident. You know, I remember one time on a tutor course asking various coaches, tell me about yourself. And, you know, the first guy, well, I coach basketball, I coach athletics, I coach football. And this guy went, I coach children to play football. And I thought, wow, that was the first guy who really impacted in that session. You know, so when you're down coaching young children, you're coaching children, and it's about fun, building their confidence, putting them into activities where they're building confidence with, and you're not, you know what you're doing, the coach knows what they're doing, but the outcome is kids are getting joy and confidence as they move into competition. You know, it starts over here at 8 years of age, 10 years of age. And again, you're trying to just build confidence with them, teach them little routines when they go to a race, and teach them how to prepare, how to warm up, you know, some of the thoughts that they have. So for me, it starts at a young age. I tell you a very quick story. I was coaching my son's team. They were 8-year-olds, and we got to a cup final, and they'd won all their games on the way up. And yeah, it was all great, but they were 2-0 down at halftime. So now we're talking, how does the coach intervene 2-0 down? And I remember I went, that's really, really great. First half, we were playing against a gale force wind, and I picked up some grass and I threw it, you know, over exaggerating. I said, look at how strong the wind is. In this second half, all you have to do is shoot at the goals, and the wind will take it in. But you know what I mean? They went out in the second half in a completely different mindset than 2-0 down. And a coach plays a huge part in changing an athlete's mindset, whatever age, whether it's 6, 8-year-olds, 10, 15-year-olds, 50-year-olds, you're still trying to change their mindset. And that's you don't need a specialist to do that. Yes, the elite people need extra help. But your ordinary club coach who's working with people day in, day out can do so much to develop their athletes' mental fitness.
I think just finally on the psychology as well, talk about kids. How much is, you know, people's mental state down to the environment they're in? Have you ever had to like take an athlete out of certain environments to improve, you know, their beliefs and
Yeah,
psychology
yeah.
around performance?
We would have a lot of situations here where obviously an athlete emerges. They've been working with a club coach. They get to a certain level. there's a kind of relationship in athletics where coaches don't want to let go of good athletes, and good athletes feel that they can't leave coaches, but they've outgrown their club, or they're too good for their club. I remember saying to David Gillick, Irish 400 meter runner, he had run the European Championships in Gothenburg, and he was training with his club here. And I remember suggesting to him, look, you need to go to an elite environment. And he went to Loughborough. He won 2 European indoor championships in the years following that. Kieran McGeehan, the Irish 1500 meter runner, has moved to the UK, and obviously other athletes moved to the States, to America, to scholarship programs. So yes, I think with people sometimes that's one example of where you're trying to move them to a higher performance environment. Other times it's the opposite. Sometimes, like I said to you, you might have to suggest to an athlete to move from a negative situation. They're being held back by maybe a coach who's overcritical or over domineering, and they just need to a different environment. And then I suppose finally, and it's more a clinical situation, a coach or people involved with athletes, you can come across clinical issues. In endurance running, anorexia can be a problem, or eating disorders. And in that case, you've got to refer to people with clinical expertise. You're not going to sort that out yourself. And that's well, I won't say it's common, but that's something that has come up in with distance runners. In other situations, depression has become a mental health issue for a lot of people now, particularly if they're not able to cope with the demands of their situation. They may be a student, they may be on a scholarship. People have a lot of expectations on them. And so that's a situation that somebody needs help, and you might need to modify their environment to help them just for their own mental health.
Yeah, great. And just moving on then, we wanted to chat to you kind of about, you mentioned earlier about how you kind of co-founded the Irish Milers Club. Talk to us a bit more about how kind of it first got off the ground, and then how it's developed over the past, 20 odd years.
Well, like I said, I was coming over to the British Milers Club meets. I saw the value of them. I mean, there were athletes who for their confidence wanted to run certain times. There were other athletes who wanted to try and get qualification. And as we know, you have to get, you've just got to get times. And if a race is set up in a way that maximizes that with pacemakers, great. And so, as I said, I saw a situation where a lot of Irish athletes were coming over, and I spoke to Frank Horwell, the founder of the British Milers Club, and a couple of us went ahead and set up the Irish Milers Club. So Frank had spoke about the 60s and all the resistance that he had from the governing body and how hard it was to put on races, and we went through exactly the same. At the time, there were 2 athletic bodies in Ireland. There was BLE, who were more the official, and there was an older body, the NACA. So the people in BLE would have hugely resisted. I mean, pathetic things when you think about them now. We would have had to stage our early races within a BLE meet. And when it would come to putting our races on, they wouldn't give us the microphone to announce, who was in the race, or they'd make it difficult for you to get the electric timing. So, and they made it hard to put on races. Then we started to run our own races. So we got our own timing and our own microphones and everything. And I remember an athlete got a qualifying time, and they weren't going to accept the qualifying time because the meet had to have field events as well. So then the next time we put on a meet, I got the throws coach to put on a shot put event down at one corner of the track, and got a few people to go up and do a long jump at the other end of the track. They were just putting obstacles in the way all the time, making it difficult. And I think that's it's a reflection really on the people. They feel that you're somehow highlighting their inadequacies by putting on these meets. They don't see it as a compliment. They think somehow it's a criticism of them, which is not the case. You're just trying to help athletes. So for the first number of years, we obviously had to try and pick our own, and we might have only had 4 races at an event because of the numbers in Ireland, and it steadily grew and steadily grew. And then we built relationships with certain track meets, and they allowed races. One of the highlights for me was we began to put a senior mile at the Irish schools track and field championships every year, which was a huge event. But the kids got to see elite runners in the mile. And then we brought Roger Bannister over in 2004 for the 50th anniversary of the sub 4. And we ran a mile in the middle of the schools event, and 3 athletes broke 4 minutes. There had never been a sub 4-minute mile on the track. That got huge publicity. And then more and more athletes wanted to come to the Irish Miler Club meets. And obviously it was cheaper than going to the BMC for the vast majority of club athletes. And so now, other people have taken on the mantle, and they've built relationships with, you probably saw the meet last week in Belfast, where the Irish Milers Club and the British Milers Club and Northern Ireland Athletics host a really successful meet now every year. What we would have done then is we would have got races in the Cork City Sports and the Morton meet in Santry in Dublin. We would run the middle distance races in that. So that's how it grew. But yeah, it's like anything, when you start something first, you just go through the obstacles and you come out the other side.
No, man, definitely sums our sport up. But then regarding talk about resistance, when you were CEO of Irish Athletics, you're technically the man in power, but you still face a bit of resistance there when you're trying to get a bit of change going as well.
Oh, huge. Well, 2 things. First of all, as I said to you, there were 2 governing bodies. So the Sports Council in Ireland insisted in 2005 that the 2 of them combine one governing body for athletics in Ireland. Otherwise, they weren't going to get any funding. So they were railroaded into forming Athletics Ireland. So that was the new governing body. There'd never been any full-time chief executive. There were office people who were paid. And so there was a recruitment process. Now, bear in mind, I've been somebody who set up the Irish Milers Club. I've been a critic of the way they ran things. And people said to me, here's the job for you now. Put your money where your mouth is. And it was an open process. It was a recruitment company. So the actual people who had been there for years had no part to play. So I get the job. And the first meeting to approve, the body was an amalgamation. There was 13 on the board. The chairman, who's a neutral chairman, comes in to just sanction, we've done the recruitment process. We have a candidate, successful candidate. Now we just need to sanction it here. The meeting took 4 hours. They did everything to resist. And eventually the vote was 7-6. So I had to work with that executive for 6 months, knowing that 6 of them definitely didn't want me there. And it was a case of trying to bring professional structures in. Now, when volunteers have run an organization for its existence, there's massive resentment against people who are being paid, certainly in the first couple of years. So that was the first thing. And I remember there's a scheme, we have a scheme in Ireland called the sports capitation, where governing bodies can apply for equipment. And in the 10 years of the scheme, nobody had ever applied for any equipment. And the first time I went in, I got 350,000. And the next time I went in, I got 750,000. And nobody on the board said a thing. There wasn't even a word of thanks or well done. It was almost like, the resentment that you did it, but we never did it. And then we started to put in professional structures, so we had a finance department, a high performance department, a coaching department. And there had only been 2 staff when I went in. And by the end of year 1, there were 11 staff. So that was a huge change. Now you had professional people running what the volunteers used to run. So you were trying to set up a structure where the volunteers were on committees and made policy, but now we had professional people to carry out the policy. And there would have been resistance. One of the things that I would probably be proud of is some of the programs that I started, was 20 years ago, are still in existence. So I had a vision for an athletic club being a place where little athletics would start. Your 4, 5, 6-year-olds would come down and just do this foundation fundamentals. Then you'd have your underage athletics, you'd have your senior athletics, your masters athletics, and then you'd have recreational runners. And I call the program Fit for Life. So the little athletics program is still going. The Fit for Life program is still going. And a lot of the people I hired are still working in there as heads of those departments. And I think that's what you learn in business. 3 Ps, really, have a purpose or a vision, get the right people to carry out that vision, because you can't do it yourself, and then set up practices that are consistent with your vision and consistent with treating people right. And so that was the big learning for me. But yeah, I loved the first year, when all these plans were being put in place, and then a lot of the resistance came in the second year. I had a 3-year contract, and I had my own business, and when you're in your own business, you make your own decisions, and you fall by them or you live by them. Whereas here, committees slow things down, and you have to bring so many people on board, and it's a really long, long process. I think I was probably too impatient to stay at it, but yeah, it was a good learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously Irish athletics are seeing kind of real upsurge in recent years, like particularly in the distance running, with a number of athletes. So what are you most excited for in the next kind of 5-10 years for Irish athletes, or maybe closer, maybe in Paris?
Yeah, look, I think there's 2 real medal chances in Paris. Obviously, Adeleke in the 400 has now, become a professional athlete. So she's not arriving in Paris having done a grueling NCAA season. So she's an exciting prospect. We have never had an Olympic medal at sprinting. So that would be really looking forward to that. Obviously, Kieran McGeehan, she's been so close. She's had 4ths there, and I think she will be there or thereabouts. It'll depend who doubles up. If a couple of these athletes just would go off and do the 5,000, it'd help matters. And relay teams have got there. Now, they're not going to medal, but it's great to see sprinters, because we wouldn't have had a major tradition of sprinting. We would have had a tradition of middle and long distance running. So, yeah, the sprinters are exciting to see. And look, in the years ahead, you're seeing the fruits of some of those early coaching programs. I remember I did a study a number of years ago for the Irish Runner magazine that anybody who medalled pretty much at an Olympic or World Games had shown signs at World Juniors or European Juniors. Pretty much all of the medalists had at their corresponding region, European or North American. So you're looking out for, I would be looking out at who's medaling at those underage competitions like European Youth Olympics, European Juniors, and McGeehan medaled at European Juniors, Adeleke the same. So you're thinking, right, all the pieces are in place for them to really do well here. And from the future, I would probably look at European World Juniors to see have we anybody coming through.
Yeah, definitely. We've obviously had a few of those on the podcast, like Nick Griggs, people like that who we're definitely super excited to see as well. But look, Brendan, it's been great to chat to you today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
I have one last thing to mention, or my technical guy will kill me. I've started to do a podcast called Success from Within. It will be launched on Spotify in mid-June. And what I've done is I've interviewed a number of top sports people in Ireland, but with a theme of mental fitness so that we can learn from them. So Olympic silver medalist, boxer, hoping to do Sonia O'Sullivan. Rachel Blackmore, the first female jockey to win a Grand National, people like that. So it'll be interesting to see that I've done 4 or 5 of them already, but I'll wait till I have a couple more done. So he said, if you don't mention success from within, I'll shoot you.
There
Oh,
you go.
wait,
Yeah,
looking
we'll
forward
plug
to
that for you,
that.
mate, as well.
No, but look, it was a real pleasure to talk to you, and it was lovely meeting Matt over in Oxford. So continued success with the podcast.
Thanks.
Okay, great to hear from Brendan Hackett there, giving you guys at home so a few things to work on, a few little practical tips and tricks as well, kind of all about sports psychology. Matt, what was it for you that kind of stood out the most?
Obviously, he speaks about mental fitness quite a lot and actually how important it is to train that side of things. And it's definitely something that is very, very easy to neglect. But then also, interesting when you do get to major championships or big event, how many people actually not choke, but I guess don't perform to their level is quite a large percentage he mentioned. And I just think that's so true. How many of us are guilty through maybe we'll have an A goal and we'll really put pressure on that A goal, whether it be preparing for a marathon, 5K PB, etc. And we'll just go a little bit too hard in the build up. We'll carry a niggle, we'll get ill, etc. And obviously that just leads to missing a little bit of training and potentially underperforming. And then as well, like for me, obviously being a coach, it was quite interesting learning about how to adopt a few of those tactics and actually work on psychology with an athlete. Obviously, not a qualified psychologist like Brendan, but coaches can still. I think it is an area where I don't think coaches read too much into, and I don't think they think about too much. The best do, and they really get the best out of their athletes. But I think a lot of us are just guilty of just trying to map out programs and trying to tweak things so our athlete feels good, responds to different styles of training. But it's just so hard to quantify, isn't it? The gains mentally. If someone's super confident, full of belief, how much more could they get out of themselves? It's very hard. Is it a second over 1500 or is it 4? So I think that's why we tend not to put as much value on the kind of mindset in the sport because we can't quantify it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure some athletes kind of coming up in some of these big races are going to be working on their sports psychology, particularly those heading into the British Champs, trying to make whether it's their first, second, third Olympic team. Maybe there's a lot of pressure going into those, but some of the races before we get to those British Champs, and obviously later in the season, we've got a few Diamond Leagues coming up, don't we, mate?
We do, and a few Diamond Leagues where we don't really know the start lists and who's been announced. But of course, next
Shock, the
weekend,
Diamond League website's not working again.
shock, mate. Yeah, I know. It's I mean, even a pre-classic, we said the other day, like how late they left it to announce their start list. And oh, by the way, I think Moose dropped out. You'll know that anyway. Yeah, and it's just the same with so many meets on the European circuit and stuff as well. So I understand things chop and change, but it's one of my favorite weekends because we have the Oslo and the Stockholm Diamond League back to back. And we've got, I think we're going to have a seriously hot men's 5K in Oslo, men's 1500 as well. Got a women's 8 and a women's 3K in Oslo, and then of course Stockholm. We've pretty much got I think we're going to see a lot of the same names just kind of hit that back to back as well. So men's 3K there and men's 3K steeple and men's 8, women's 15. So it's just some really good middle distance action about to take place next week. And just apologize that we haven't got those start lists, so we can't speculate who's running it. But one's on Friday, one's on Sunday, and so tune in basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is exciting for me is this time of year in championship year, particularly Olympic year. This is when we start to kind of see how people are going. Once they get into their sort of second or third race of the season, we start to make those predictions for the Olympic Games. And that's something that we plan on doing with you guys as well. Again, so I believe we're bringing it back, aren't we, Matt? Like we need to get some details ironed out, but we will be doing some sort of prediction contest And I'm sure we can sort out a prize again this year, but nothing confirmed as yet. But just to kind of get you guys aware, if you haven't taken part before, we normally do kind of Olympic or a World Champs prediction contest. Probably do one for British Champs as well actually. Kind of seeing who'll make that team, and then for the actual games itself. So keep an eye on our socials for that. But we'll obviously update people through the podcast as well. It's normally just trying to pick your winners. So winners of the British Champs, and then later on in the season we'll do winners of the Olympics. So I'm looking forward to starting to get my picks together. We have mixed success, don't we, Matt? Some years we're absolutely way off it. Some years not too bad. I nearly won the British Champs one year, I remember. But then we decided that would be a bit unfair, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we had to disqualify you actually. I think you were equal first place for your predictions. Yeah, I think the British champs one will be especially interesting. And I do feel like Tokyo is a little bit easier. I just think of how far the sport's moved on since Tokyo even. Like
Just the depth, isn't it? It's the
yeah,
depth.
that's what I mean. The depth is just, since Tokyo, I feel like, look, there was 2 or 3 in each event that were absolute locks, and there wasn't that many surprises. Whereas, this time around, everyone's under threat, and except people like, I'd probably say Kerr and Keeley. Other than that, I think it's very hard to call. And, you could even say, men's 800, how can you not put Patterson in that team after that bronze last year? But I'm thinking British champs is anyone's race, and you've got people like Giles and Rowden and Bergen. And by the way, when is Max Bergen opening up? Apparently he's training, but so keep your eyes peeled.
As we know, best thing for them to do is just open up a British Champs, then it'll be fine.
It's true.
So, not a massive
Right.
issue, is it?
I think that wraps up the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll catch you very soon.